Origins of the Force, the Essence of Life. Chapter 1. The Wellspring of Life. Before there were stars, before the ancient spires of Coruscant pierced the sky or the Jedi carved temples into the mountains of Ossus, there was the Force. Not as we know it today, not bound by lightsabers or robes or codes, but as a boundless energy that wrapped itself around every speck of matter in the universe. It was not worshipped, it simply was. The Force is often described as an energy field created by all living things, but that is a simplification, a Jedi explanation, shaped by millennia of philosophy and tradition. In truth, the Force existed long before sentience. It did not begin in a single place, nor was it born from one people's myth. It was everywhere, all at once, an invisible breath between atoms, a whisper in the void, the first and last note in the symphony of the cosmos. The oldest surviving texts from across the galaxy speak in hushed tones about something called the wellspring of life. Hidden in uncharted space and long shrouded in mystery, the wellspring is said to be a primordial place where the Force pours most purely into the galaxy. Some say it is a physical world, a planet saturated with raw energy. Others believe it is not a place but a state of being, a convergence point of consciousness and nature. Jedi Masters who have devoted their lives to meditation speak of the wellspring as a feeling of perfect unity, a moment when their thoughts dissolve and only the Force remains. There were stories, quiet, half-believed stories, that the first beings to ever perceive the Force did so after coming into contact with this wellspring. They were not Jedi, they were not Sith, they had no names. But in that encounter they did not hear a voice, they felt presence. It is this presence, not doctrine, that has echoed across cultures for millennia. To understand the Force, one must first understand its dual nature. It is not simply good or evil. These are constructs of sentient minds. The Force, as ancient mystics like the Daibendu first observed, is divided into two great currents: the cosmic force, which binds the galaxy together, and the living force, which animates every living being. The living force is immediate and personal. It flows through every creature, connects predator and prey, and gives breath to the smallest moss clinging to the rocks on Dagobah. When a creature dies, its life energy returns to the Force. The Jedi believed that deep connection to the living Force allowed one to act without conscious thought, to sense danger before it occurred, or to feel pain across great distances. Jedi like Qui-Gon Jinn were known to listen more closely to the living Force than to the dogma of the Order. The cosmic force, on the other hand, is vast, timeless. It flows through galaxies, guiding the destinies of stars and civilizations alike. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant housed murals that tried to depict this truth. Planets orbiting stars, the great migration of species, the rise and fall of empires. All part of a design, a rhythm too vast to be seen from any single point of view. The Jedi taught that death was not the end, but a return to the cosmic force, a surrender of self into something greater. It is in this surrender that some Jedi, like Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi, found the path to immortality, not of the body, but of consciousness. They became one with the Force, yet retained their identity. This was not a power, but a consequence of deep understanding and selflessness. Others, like the Sith, sought to bend the Force to their will, to use its energy to extend life unnaturally, to impose their will on fate. In this, they often tore themselves from the flow of the cosmic force, becoming hollow and corrupted. The idea of balance is central to the Force, but not as a battle between light and dark. Balance in the oldest teachings is harmony. It is the dance of predator and prey, birth and decay, joy and sorrow. On the world of Tython, where the first great Force tradition known as the Jedi Order arose, This principle was literal. 2 moons, Ashla and Bogan, represented the light and the dark. When the moons were in alignment, the force was calm. When imbalance occurred, storms of energy raged across the planet's surface. Ashla represented serenity, compassion, and understanding, what would later become the light side. Bogan embodied passion, aggression, and power, the root of the dark side. But on Tython, neither was evil. Both were necessary. Jedi students were trained to walk the path between extremes. To fall too deeply into either side meant exile, banishment not out of punishment, but out of recognition that imbalance within an individual could spread like infection across the stars. This ancient view contrasts sharply with the more rigid dichotomy that emerged in later ages. As the Jedi Order developed into a galactic institution and the Sith into a philosophy of domination, the Force was increasingly framed in moral absolutes. But remnants of the older understanding survived in the songs of the Lurmen, the rituals of the Bardotans, and the philosophies of unaligned wanderers who felt the Force not as command or destiny, but as breath and river. Even outside the Jedi and Sith, the Force revealed itself. The Lasat, an old species once thought extinct, worshipped the Force as Ashla not as an energy to control, but as a current to flow with. Their warriors chanted battle hymns in honor of this connection, moving in rhythmic combat that mirrored the push and pull of the living Force. On Jeddah, the Guardians of the Wills built temples to honor the Force, guarding sacred kyber crystals and preserving ancient texts that even the Jedi had forgotten. In every corner of the galaxy, the Force manifested in different ways, sometimes through song, sometimes through silence, sometimes through power, sometimes through peace. The Jedi claimed to understand the Force. The Sith claimed to own it. But in truth, no one owns the Force. No one fully understands it. It cannot be mapped or tamed. It can only be listened to, trusted, and at times feared. For those attuned to it, the Force is not a tool, it is a truth. And as the galaxy expanded and civilizations rose, the understanding of that truth would shape empires, forge legends, and spark wars that scarred the stars themselves. But long before those wars, long before lightsabers clashed in temple halls or Sith Lords whispered in the dark, there was only the Force, and those first trembling beings who opened their hearts and listened. Chapter 2: The Celestials and the Architects of Power. To truly understand the deeper mysteries of the Force, one must look to the ancient beings who shaped the galaxy itself, those who came before the Jedi, before the Sith, before even the Jedi. In whispered myths and half-lost ruins, they are known as the Celestials. The Celestials are not a species easily defined. No one knows what they looked like or where they came from. Some speculate they were an ancient race of hyper-evolved Force sensitives. Others believe they were manifestations of the Force itself. But the evidence of their presence is scattered across the stars, in monolithic artifacts, gravity wells too perfectly engineered to be natural, and in entire solar systems whose harmony defies random cosmic design. One of the most striking relics tied to the Celestials is the Corellian system. Its planets are impossibly allied and orbit around a gravitational center that, by all known laws of physics, should not exist. Corellian legends speak of mysterious architects who forged the system into order, and some scholars believe the massive artifact known as Centerpoint Station, a hypermassive ancient construct with the power to move planets, was one of the Celestials' tools. If so, it represents a mastery of the Force far beyond telekinesis or precognition. It is the power to sculpt reality. But more than their engineering feats, it is their relationship to the Force that draws the attention of mystics and philosophers. The most significant clue to their role in galactic balance comes not from machines or stones, but from a place far more elusive, the realm of Mortis. Mortis was not a planet in the traditional sense. It existed in a realm outside time and space, a shifting, dreamlike dimension where the Force pulsed with unusual intensity. Few ever found it, and fewer still returned. Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Ahsoka Tano are among the very few recorded travelers to Mortis, and their brief time there left lasting marks on them and the galaxy. At the heart of Mortis stood three beings: the Father, the Daughter, and the Son. They were not simply powerful Force users, they were the Force, each embodying one of its primal aspects. The Daughter represented the light, graceful and serene. The Son embodied the dark, tempestuous and hungry. The Father held them in balance, his very presence maintaining the fragile harmony between them. The Father's purpose was clear: to prevent his children from falling into chaos, to preserve equilibrium. His struggle mirrored the eternal conflict within the Force itself, light and dark, ever pulling at one another, threatening to collapse into imbalance. In this strange place, Anakin was tested, shown his potential to bring balance, or destroy it. Mortis raises a provocative question. Were these three actual beings, or metaphors given shape by the Force to teach a lesson? Some believe that the Celestials created Mortis as a prison or sanctuary, and that the Father and his children were Celestials who ascended into pure Force expression. Others argue they were not creators but caretakers, intermediaries appointed by the Force to preserve its cosmic integrity. What matters is the legacy they left behind. Throughout Jedi and Sith history, the themes of Mortis recur: balance, sacrifice, power unchecked. The Jedi, in their search for peace, often leaned too heavily toward control and suppression. The Sith, in their lust for freedom and dominance, spiraled into corruption and collapse. Neither could grasp what the Celestials seemed to understand: that the Force is not a battle to be won, but a current to be guided, a duality to be honored. The idea of Force avatars did not end with Mortis. In ancient texts recovered from Jeddah and Ossus, there are tales of beings who acted as vessels for the Force's will: the shaman of the wills, the dreamwalkers of the Cathol Rift, and even whispers of entire species touched by the Force to preserve balance or awaken change. In some Force traditions, these beings are referred to as anchors, souls so attuned to the Force that they tether balance in times of great turmoil. In this interpretation, individuals like Anakin Skywalker, Luke Skywalker, and Rey were not simply powerful, they were chosen by the Force itself to serve as living fulcrums. But with choice comes weight. The son of Mortis, consumed by his desire for power, attempted to overthrow his father and bend the galaxy to his will. The daughter, in contrast, sacrificed herself to preserve innocence. It was not strength that defined her, it was compassion. This distinction would become a central theme in the way Jedi would later interpret their roles, not as conquerors or saviors, but as guardians. What is also striking about Mortis and the Celestials is their detachment from the traditional moral systems of good and evil. The Son was not evil for using the dark side, he was dangerous because he was out of balance. The daughter's light was not always gentle, it could be forceful, even wrathful when necessary. The Father understood that to favor one too much over the other would unravel everything. This is a lesson modern Force traditions have often ignored. The Jedi, fearing corruption, shunned emotion, attachment, and desire, believing them to lead down the dark path. But in doing so, they sometimes turned away from the living Force itself, becoming rigid, institutionalized, and slow to adapt. The Sith, embracing emotion and power, lost themselves in obsession and pride. Mortis reminds us that the Force is not static, it breathes, shifts, it requires humility. In more recent times, Force sensitives like Luke Skywalker began to rediscover the ancient truths the Celestials embodied. Luke's study of forgotten Jedi texts and lost cultures led him to question the binary systems of Jedi and Sith. He recognized the need for a broader understanding, one that honored the complexity of the Force rather than reducing it to a struggle between light and dark. The Celestials, though long banished from the galaxy, left more than relics and riddles. They left a challenge, a warning, a quiet wisdom carved into the stars, that power without balance leads to ruin, that harmony is not found in domination or submission, but in understanding. No one knows what became of the Celestials. Perhaps they ascended into the Force itself. Perhaps they were never beings at all, but moments, echoes, symbols of a truth too great for words. But across the galaxy, when the Force swells in the hearts of those who listen, when balance is threatened or restored, it is said the Celestials stir once more, not as gods or ghosts, but as the breath between shadow and flame. Chapter 3. The First Force Societies. Long before the Jedi raised their gleaming towers on Coruscant or the Sith carved their secrets into obsidian pyramids on Korriban, there were others, quiet seers, hidden clans, and lost empires who first touched the Force and dared to ask what it meant. These earliest Force sensitives were not warriors. They were watchers, wanderers, scholars. Their names are etched into ancient walls, sung in fading hymns, or scattered in fragments through forgotten star systems. And yet, their influence is everywhere. The first whispers of Force awareness trace back to the Daibendu, a contemplative order that arose in the remote mountain regions of Ando Prime. They were not aligned with any galactic power. They did not build weapons or engage in war. Instead, they meditated in silence, studying the rhythms of the stars and the energy that flowed between all things. To them, the Force was breath. It was motion, cycle, and balance. Their ancient scrolls describe the Force as the wind against the stone, the silence between heartbeats. The Daibendu believed that only through detachment from desire could one sense the truth of the Force. Their monastic lifestyle and deeply spiritual rituals would later inspire some of the Jedi Order's earliest codes, especially their emphasis on serenity and mindfulness. But unlike the Jedi, the Daibendu never sought to control the Force. They sought to reflect it, to mirror its flow. Even older than the Daibendu, perhaps by millennia, were the Zepho, a now extinct species who once ruled vast regions of the Outer Rim. The Zepho were powerful Force sensitives, so powerful in fact that their mastery of energy manipulation allowed them to construct towering monuments that still resist decay, their runes pulsing with dormant power even after ages of abandonment. Yet the Zepho fell. Their downfall was not war, but pride. In the beginning, they believed in a neutral philosophy of balance, much like the Jedi who would come later. They studied the Force as both Ashla and Bogan, light and shadow. But as their leaders became seduced by ambition, they tilted toward the dark, embracing rituals that twisted their minds and poisoned their culture. They called this new path the Ilram Doctrine, a philosophy rooted in conquest and superiority. Those who resisted were cast out, and a civil war tore through their civilization. In the end, the Zepho vanished into obscurity, some fleeing into the unknown regions, others perhaps destroyed by the very powers they sought to master. Today, their broken temples lie buried beneath sand and snow, their secrets accessible only to those brave, or foolish, enough to unlock them. From the ashes of fallen empires rose the Rakata, a species that would take Force manipulation to its most terrifying extremes. Hailing from Leon, also known as Rakata Prime, the Rakata were among the first beings to use the Force, not just spiritually but technologically. They created starships, weapons, and tools powered by what they called the dark side of the Force, forging an empire that spanned across the galaxy in an age now called the Infinite Empire. Unlike the Jedi or the Zepho, the Rakata saw the Force as a means to dominate. They believed it was their divine right to enslave lesser species and reshape entire worlds. Using their Star Forge, a massive space-bound factory powered by the Force and a star's core, They created fleets, droids, and war machines without limit. But such power came at a cost. The Rakata began to turn on each other. Their hunger for domination consumed them from within. The Starforge, infused with the dark side, grew unstable, feeding on hatred, accelerating their madness. Eventually, their connection to the Force began to erode. Whether due to disease, internal schism, or the Force itself rejecting them, they lost their power and their empire crumbled into myth. What remained were scattered relics, blackened ruins, and whispered warnings across the galaxy that to treat the Force as a weapon, as the Rakata did, is to invite ruin. The Jedi would later encounter Rakatan technology and seal it away, fearing its influence. Sith Lords, in contrast, sometimes sought it out, hoping to unlock its secrets. Not all early Force traditions were consumed by arrogance. On the remote planet of Bardotta, the Dargoin Order quietly flourished. They rejected both the Jedi and Sith interpretations of the Force, choosing instead a path of contemplation and personal enlightenment. The Dargoin Masters viewed the Force as a song, one sung by the universe itself. Their rituals involved chant, meditation, and deep communion with the spirits of the planet. The Bardottans were so attuned to the Force that Jedi emissaries often found themselves humbled in their presence, their more pragmatic doctrines clashing with the Dargoyan way. The Bardottans resisted Jedi interference, seeing them as misguided. In one ancient account, a Jedi Master wrote, "The Force flows strong here, but they hear it differently, more clearly perhaps." Even Emperor Palpatine, before his rise, was known to have sought out Bardottan secrets, hoping to twist them to his own ends. Elsewhere in the unknown regions, uncharted and dangerous, scattered tales speak of Force traditions that defy classification. Among them, the Chiss navigators, known as Skywalkers, were Force sensitives, trained from childhood to guide ships through the treacherous, shifting paths of uncharted space. Their connection to the Force was not philosophical, it was instinctual. To them, the Force was a compass, not a calling. These Skywalkers, mostly young girls, would lose their abilities as they aged, their connection fading by adolescence, but during their short years of sensitivity, they served as the eyes of the Chiss ascendancy, guiding entire fleets through the black void where hyperspace beacons failed. The Chiss, logical and strategic by nature, never fully embraced or understood the mysticism behind the Force, but they respected its value and the children who wielded it. Across all these early traditions, Zepho, Rakata, Dai Bendu, Bardottans and more, one theme endures: diversity of interpretation. The Force was not a monolith, it was a prism, and each culture, each people saw through it a different light. Some saw freedom, others saw fate, some sought to serve, others to conquer. And in these scattered philosophies, we find the roots of what would one day become the Jedi, the Sith, and 1,000 splinter sects across the stars. We find the origin of codes, of creeds, of temples and war. But more than that, we see a galaxy awakening, a galaxy learning to listen, a galaxy beginning to feel. Chapter 4: The Jedi of Tython. In the center of the deep core, hidden by violent hyperspace anomalies and gravitational storms, lies a planet unlike any other, Tython. Ancient, wild, and steeped in power, Tython is the birthplace of the Jedi Order, the original Force tradition from which both Jedi and Sith would later emerge. Here, amidst lush forests and twin moons, the Force surged so strongly that to live on Tython was to feel its rhythm in every breath. The planet pulsed with harmony, and sometimes with catastrophe. Thousands of years before the Republic was founded, mysterious starships known as the Tsoyor appeared across the galaxy. Massive pyramidal vessels, unlike anything seen before, they emitted no communication, no demand, only a pull. On worlds as distant as Kashyyyk, Ryloth and Dathomir, they drew Force sensitives aboard and vanished into the stars. These chosen few were not kidnapped. They went willingly, drawn by a vision, a calling deep within their spirit. When the Tho-Yor completed their pilgrimage, they all landed on Tython, and those who stepped out would become the first Jedi. The Jedi Order was not an army. It was not a religion. It was a philosophy, a way of life, centered on balance. The Jedi believed in the unity of Ashla, the light side of the Force, and Bogan, the dark. These were not moral absolutes but natural energies, emotions, instincts, serenity and power. The Force, they taught, could only be truly understood by walking between these extremes. Their homeworld reflected this truth with eerie perfection. When Ashla, the bright moon, and Bogan, the dark moon, aligned in the sky, the Force across Tython calmed, and harmony reigned. But when either moon dominated, the planet's energies became unstable. Violent force storms would erupt, tearing through forests, leveling stone and shaking the ground. It was as if the planet itself demanded balance. To live as a Jedi was to embrace this tension. Children were trained from a young age, sent on journeys between 9 great temples, each dedicated to a different aspect of the Force: science, healing, martial skill, contemplation. Each temple was guarded by its own masters, each offering a unique view of the Force's nature. The path between them, known as the Great Journey, was the Jedi's rite of passage. No one could claim mastery until they had faced both Ashla and Bogan within themselves, and emerge still centered. This journey was not without peril. Those who fell too far to either side were not executed or imprisoned. Instead, they were exiled, cast into the wilderness to reflect and recover. Some returned stronger. Others vanished. The Jedi believed that the Force must be respected, not wielded for domination or suppressed by fear. To impose one's will upon it too forcefully was to invite destruction, but to deny its call was to fade into stagnation. Among their many teachings, one stands out as both wise and haunting. There is no fear in balance. There is only the storm and the eye within it. The Jedi culture was incredibly diverse. Drawn from many species and homeworlds, they shared no single language or origin, but were united in practice. They meditated with crystals to better hear the Force's resonance. They trained with weapons not for conquest, but to discipline their instincts. They studied astronomy, biology, and philosophy, believing that knowledge itself was a facet of the Force. One of their most sacred rituals was the journey to Bogan, where initiates who showed dangerous imbalance were sent to the dark moon to meditate in isolation. There, they would confront their fears, their anger, and their hunger for power. It was not considered a punishment, but a mirror, a chance to truly see oneself. But no society is perfect. Over centuries, factions within the Jedi began to drift apart. Some believed Ashla, light, compassion, peace, was the Force's true path. Others began to favor Bogan, passion, strength, evolution. What began as philosophical debate soon became a schism. A powerful Jedi known as Rajan, once revered for his insights into Bogan, began to teach that true mastery came not from balance, but from embracing the storm. He argued that the Force favored the strong, that restraint was weakness. He and his followers left the temples and began conducting forbidden experiments, attempting to channel Bogan directly to reshape the world around them. When confronted, Rajan did not back down. He ignited war. This event, known as the Force Wars, nearly destroyed Tython. Jedi fought Jedi, temples were shattered, force storms ravaged the planet like never before. In the end, the followers of Ashla prevailed, but the cost was immense. The survivors realized that balance could no longer be preserved by walking the middle path. The extremes were too dangerous. The Jedi disbanded. In its place arose a new order, one that chose to follow the light side alone, fearing what Bogan could unleash. This would become the Jedi Order. Those who followed Rajan were exiled once more, this time not to Bogan, but into the void between stars. They would settle on a harsh red world called Korriban, where their rage and ambition would fester into something far darker. They would become the Sith. And so, from the ashes of the Jedi Order, two new legacies were born. One devoted to control and serenity, the other to passion and power. But both, in their own way, had lost something. The vision of the Jedi who had once stood between the moons, not rejecting either, but seeking harmony between them. Even today, the ruins of the Jedi temples remain, overgrown, half-buried, whispering with ancient echoes. Some Jedi scholars return there, hoping to find lost wisdom. A few Sith, too, seeking roots older than even their darkest codes. Tython itself sleeps, its skies still watching with twin eyes. Ashla and Bogan, forever circling. And beneath that sky the wind still sings the first lesson of the Force. Balance is not stillness, it is motion, held in grace. Chapter 5. The Rise of Jedi and Sith. From the shattered ideals of the Jedi Order, the galaxy witnessed the birth of two great legacies, the Jedi and the Sith. They would define not only the philosophy and politics of countless systems, but the very meaning of the Force for millennia to come. Yet their origins were not forged in clarity, but in schism, sorrow, and the fracturing of an ancient truth. After the cataclysmic Force wars on Tython, the survivors of the Jedi looked upon their devastated world and understood that balance, as they had once pursued it, had failed them. They saw in Bogan a terrible danger, one that could not be harmonized but must be rejected entirely. The philosophy of walking between Ashla and Bogan gave way to a stricter vision, a life of calm, peace and discipline guided only by Ashla, the light side. Thus began the formation of the Jedi Order, not as warriors but as scholars, seekers and defenders. Their earliest temples were built on Elam, Jeddah and later Coruscant itself. These sites, rich in the living force, became centers of learning and meditation. Here, initiates studied the nature of the Force as a path toward peace, selflessness and harmony. The Jedi believed that emotion, particularly fear, anger and attachment, was the gateway to the dark side. They taught that to serve the Force meant to act without personal desire, to surrender ego, and to listen. Their lightsabers, constructed from rare kyber crystals, were more than weapons. They were sacred tools, resonant with the crystal's will and the bearer's intent. A Jedi's blade was not just an instrument of combat, it was a reflection of their connection to the Force. Jedi culture emphasized quiet service. They operated as neutral guardians, mediators in galactic disputes, and defenders of peace. The Jedi Code, etched into holocrons and ancient murals, forbade attachment, fear, and passion. These were seen not just as distractions, but as cracks through which the dark side could seep. Yet while the Jedi flourished, far from the core, another legacy was taking root, one born from the exiled followers of Bogan who had refused to surrender after the Force Wars. These exiles wandered the galaxy, bitter and broken, until they came upon a harsh, red-swept world, Korriban. Here they encountered the native Sith species, a proud, red-skinned people already attuned to the darker currents of the Force. The Dark Jedi, powerful and cunning, soon dominated the Sith, but not as slavers. Instead, they interbred with them, merged cultures and laid the foundation for a new order. This hybrid civilization would eventually come to call itself the Sith Order. The Sith rejected everything the Jedi stood for. They believed the Force was not a thing to serve, but a power to command. They embraced emotion, passion, and desire as strengths, not weaknesses. Their philosophy was crystallized in the Sith Code, a sharp inversion of Jedi restraint. Peace is a lie, there is only passion. Through passion, I gain strength. Through strength, I gain power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory my chains are broken. The Force shall free me. Where the Jedi sought to transcend the self, the Sith sought to perfect it. Their rituals were brutal, their hierarchy ruthless. Power was earned, seized, and defended. The Sith saw strength as virtue. Weakness was failure. Masters trained apprentices not out of compassion, but necessity, always knowing that one day the apprentice might rise and strike them down. It was not betrayal, it was evolution. Yet the Sith were not merely warlords, they were scholars in their own right. They delved into Force alchemy, crafting terrible creatures and bending biology to their will. They built massive temples and holocrons to store their knowledge, often hidden beneath layers of illusion and traps. They believed that to study the Force was to seek ultimate understanding of life and death, and in this pursuit some achieved terrifying feats, extended lifespans, spirit transfer, even resurrection. But power breeds conflict. As the Sith Empire grew, so too did rivalries. Wars erupted between Sith lords, each seeking to outdo the others. This era, known as the 100-Year Darkness, culminated in devastating battles between Jedi and Sith across countless worlds. Jedi historians recorded these wars as proof of the dark side's danger. Sith texts called them the crucible through which true power emerged. In time, the Jedi would push the Sith back, scattering their empires and driving survivors into hiding. But the damage had been done. The galaxy was no longer a place of quiet Force contemplation. It had become a battlefield for ideologies. The Jedi Order, now tied closely to the Galactic Republic, expanded its presence. They built the Great Temple on Coruscant and became advisors to senators, generals in wars, and diplomats in times of peace. This partnership brought influence, but also compromise. The Siths, forced into secrecy, evolved. From open empires, they became shadows. One Sith Lord, Darth Bane, would eventually reshape their entire philosophy, instituting the rule of two, one to embody power, the other to crave it. This ensured secrecy, survival, and a singular focus. No longer an empire of infighting lords, the Sith became a hidden lineage, each apprentice stronger than the last. Across these centuries, both orders lost and found themselves. Jedi became more rigid, fearful of emotion, and increasingly blind to nuance. The Sith, driven underground, became cunning, manipulative, and obsessed with revenge. Both forgot their shared origin, the Jedi's pursuit of balance. And yet, the echoes of that origin never fully disappeared. Some Jedi began to question the Order's rigidity. Others walked away from it entirely. Meanwhile, not all Sith were tyrants. Some believed in transformation and freedom rather than cruelty. The divide between light and dark, once a spectrum, had become a wall. But through that wall, cracks would always form. Because the Force does not take sides. It flows where it will, and those who listen carefully enough, whether Jedi or Sith, scholar or child, will hear it calling not to war, but to truth. Chapter 6. Witches, Prophets and Guardians. Beyond the rigid codes of the Jedi and the dark ambition of the Sith, there exists a vast galaxy of Force sensitives who walk paths less known, paths guided by ancestral rites, primal instincts, or deep spiritual vision. These traditions rarely seek galactic dominance. Some hide in shadowed forests, others guard sacred relics or commune with spirits. Their power may not echo in Senate halls or command starfleets, but it pulses through the roots of forgotten worlds. These are the witches, the prophets, the guardians of the old truths. Among the most enigmatic of these are the Nightsisters of Dathomir. To the Jedi they were heretics, to the Sith unpredictable tools, but to their own kind they were clan, a fierce matriarchal society that revered the Force not as an abstract current, but as a tangible, manipulative force of magic. The Nightsisters drew power from a viscous green energy they called spirit ichor, a manifestation of the Force channeled through chants, rituals, and ancestral communion. They conjured illusions, raised the dead, summoned storms, and bound spirits to flesh. Unlike the Sith, who hoarded knowledge, or the Jedi who feared excess, the Nightsisters embraced the chaotic dance of the Force. Their spells wove together emotion, will, and memory, fueled by the bond between clan and nature. Their society was ruled by a matron, with leadership often earned through cunning, power, and spiritual insight. One of the most infamous leaders, Mother Talzin, possessed the rare ability to project her consciousness across space and even defy death. She claimed to have once been promised a place among the Sith, only to be betrayed. Her vendetta against Darth Sidious would ignite a series of deadly conflicts during the Clone Wars. Yet not all on Dathomir embraced the Night Sister path. The Night Brothers, mostly Zabrak males like Savage Opress and Darth Maul, were bred for strength and servitude. Often treated as warriors or sacrifices, they lived harsh lives under matriarchal rule. Still, even they carried the Force's imprint. Particularly Maul, whose rage-fueled power would scar the galaxy for decades. Far across the stars, on the serene world of Bardotta, another Force tradition flourished in contrast. The Dagoyan order, largely unknown to the wider galaxy, practiced a deeply spiritual and non-violent interpretation of the Force. They viewed it not as a battlefield of light and dark, but as a cosmic song, one that resonated through meditation, art, and internal harmony. The Dagoyan masters were renowned for their visions and prophetic dreams, believing that by silencing the body and the mind, one could hear the whispers of destiny. When Jedi emissaries first encountered the Bardottans, they were shocked by their rejection of Jedi teachings. The Dagon saw the Jedi's militarization as a betrayal of the Force. To them, even the light side could become corrupted if bound by rules and politics. Though peaceful, they were fiercely independent. Some said even the Force itself bowed to their silence. On Jeddah, the Force was not practiced, it was worshipped. The holy city of Jeddah, perched atop the planet's towering mesas, was home to the Guardians of the Wills. Unlike Jedi or Sith, the Guardians did not seek to manipulate the Force. They protected sacred places, safeguarded ancient Kyber crystals, and recited prayers passed down for generations. One of their chants speaks of the Force as flame. The Force is with me, and I am one with the Force. These words, simple yet powerful, became a mantra for the Guardians, most famously uttered by Chirrut Imwe, a blind warrior monk who, though not trained as a Jedi, demonstrated uncanny awareness and insight through his connection to the Force. His companion, Baze Malbus, was less devout, but even he carried a deep respect for the sacred path they had once walked together. Chija itself was a magnet for Force sensitives of all kinds. Jedi pilgrims came to meditate, Sith agents to plunder. The Empire, seeking to harvest Kyber for its Death Star project, ultimately destroyed much of Nejija, but the faith of the Guardians endured. Even in rubble, their chants still echoed. In the unknown regions, strange traditions endured beyond Republic charts. The Voss mystics, native to the remote world of Voss, possessed extraordinary prophetic abilities. Their visions shaped every decision in their society, from warfare to marriage. The Voss saw no division between Force practice and daily life. It was one stream flowing through their culture's heart. Jedi masters who visited Voss often found themselves shaken. The mystics spoke of the Force in terms alien to Republic understanding, visions not as warnings, but events that had already happened, merely waiting to unfold. Still deeper in mystery were the shamans of the Wills, elusive figures said to possess knowledge of eternal consciousness. Some scholars believe it was a shaman of the Wills who taught Yoda the secret of retaining identity after death, of becoming one with the Force while still maintaining the self. This was not immortality in the physical sense, but in the spiritual. To become a Force ghost was not a power, it was a surrender so complete that the soul flowed back into the Force and emerged again luminous and unbound. The Jedi often kept their distance from these divergent practices. Their order, structured and increasingly centralized, struggled with the ambiguity of these other traditions. Some saw them as dangerous, others dismissed them as misguided. But the wisest Jedi, those who journeyed far and listened deeply, knew the truth. The Force speaks in many voices. And the Sith? They feared these traditions. The Nightsisters could not be controlled. The Voss mystics revealed truths they could not twist. The Guardians of the Wills, despite having no armies or lightsabers, defied every Sith attempt to desecrate Jedha until the Empire turned its superweapon upon them. In every age, in every corner of the galaxy, these hidden Force practitioners carried forward a truth older than either Jedi or Sith. The Force does not belong to a creed. It cannot be claimed by council or crown. It is wild, vast, alive. Sometimes it is a storm, sometimes a whisper. Or womp, or worse woff, or woe. But always it waits for those who dare to listen. Chapter 7. The Seers and the Silent Orders. Across the galaxy, hidden in monasteries, drifting through time-space anomalies, or quietly meditating in forgotten enclaves, there are Force sensitives whose practices transcend even the most ancient traditions. These are not warriors, nor are they always teachers. They are seekers, seers, illusionists, dreamwalkers, and silent mystics, beings who do not bend the Force to their will, but instead dissolve into it. To them, the Force is not a weapon or a religion. It is the language of the universe, a song to be heard in silence and stillness. Few embody this approach more profoundly than the Fallanassi. Rarely spoken of, the Fallanassi are an elusive Force sect that believe entirely in non-violence and in a total surrender of self. Their homeworld, Lucasac, remained hidden for centuries, shrouded in misdirection. The Fallanassi view the Force not as a duality of light and dark, but as a white current, a flow of spiritual consciousness that can be followed but never commanded. Their power lies in illusion, not cheap tricks, but deep, immersive projections created by weaving thought into reality. A skilled Fallanassi can craft entire landscapes, hide cities, or even project illusions across planetary distances. During the Galactic Civil War, some Jedi survivors sought them out, not for combat training, but to learn how to vanish. Unlike the Jedi who feared attachment or the Sith who sought legacy, the Fallanassi sought dissolution, the erasure of ego, identity, and desire. They believed that by letting go of the self entirely, they became part of the Force in its purest form. Few ever mastered this, and fewer still returned to speak of it. At the edge of known space, deeper still into mystery, dwelled the Ainti monks. These beings were unlike any other in the galaxy, xenophobic, reclusive, and yet deeply attuned to the Force. Their species was serpentine and multi-limbed, and their philosophy of the Force was radically different. The Ainti did not see the Force as light or dark. They saw it as many colors, each representing a different emotional, spiritual, or temporal state. They traveled through folds in space, using the Force to manipulate time and movement in ways that defied Jedi understanding. They were time walkers, capable of perceiving multiple timelines, even experiencing events out of sequence. To train with the Ainti was not to learn rules, but to abandon them. They rejected doctrine, hierarchy, and even explanation. They believed the Force was to be experienced intuitively, not dissected or named. The few Jedi who encountered them, such as Jorah Talcott and Luke Skywalker, were forced to let go of everything they knew, of control, certainty, and fear. Another hidden path through the Force was that of dream walking, the art of entering the minds of others, traversing memory, prophecy, and subconscious fears. In the Cathal Rift, a region distorted by gravitational anomalies and ancient energy fields, some Force sensitives evolved into dreamers, silent travelers who could walk through the minds of others as easily as through corridors. These dreamwalkers had no order, no texts, no training centers. Their power was passed down in whispers and dreams. They would visit dying worlds, sleep beside the sick, or drift into battlefields unseen. The information they gleaned, memories, secrets, visions, could change the course of systems. But the burden was great. Some lost themselves within others, unable to return to their own consciousness. Others found truths so vast they returned broken. To the Jedi, dreamwalking was dangerous, bordering on invasive. To the Sith, it was an opportunity for manipulation, but to the dreamers themselves, it was a sacred walk through the lives of the galaxy, bearing witness to joy and pain alike. Even within the known galaxy, there were silent orders, groups who followed the Force without ever speaking of it aloud. On the moon of Arris, a sect of human mystics known only as the Silence of Arris lived in total quiet, communicating only through gesture and expression. They believed words corrupted the truth of the Force. By remaining silent, they claimed to hear its voice more clearly. Their Force practices were subtle, gentle nudges, momentary stillness, shared emotion. A member of the Silence could calm a panicked crowd or lift a dying child's fear with nothing but their presence. They wore no robes, carried no weapons. To the Republic, they were folklore. To those who met them, they were unforgettable. And then there are the Seers, those across all cultures who receive visions from the Force. Some see possible futures, others glimpse ancient events, feel echoes of decisions yet to be made. Seers often live isolated lives, burdened by the knowledge they carry. On worlds like Lothal, Endor, and even Taris, hermits and prophets have shaped planetary fates simply by following visions they could neither explain nor deny. Force visions are among the most mysterious phenomena. Jedi believe they come from the cosmic Force, while others believe they are messages from the Force itself, shaping destiny. Not all visions are literal, some are metaphor, test, or warning. The future, after all, is always in motion. But the Seers, those who truly see, often speak of a strange moment before the vision comes, a stillness, a deepening silence, as if the galaxy is inhaling, and in that breath, the veil lifts. From the Falanassi's shimmering illusions to the Angti's spiraling time paths, from dreamwalkers to silent monks, these diverse paths remind us of one thing. The Force is not a monolith, it is a tapestry. Each tradition adds a thread, a pattern, a color. Each voice, even if silent, contributes to the song. The Jedi may speak of discipline, the Sith may preach power, but the Force listens to all who reach out, and some it speaks to in dreams. Chapter 8. Machines, Science, and the Force. For all its mysticism, for all the chanting monks and solemn temples, the Force has never existed in isolation from the physical world. It flows through life, but it also flows through matter. And throughout galactic history, there have been those who sought not just to understand the Force, but to quantify it, to harness it, measure it, and fuse it with the tools of industry, war, and evolution. Where the Jedi meditated and the Sith performed dark rituals, other civilizations turned to science. Among the earliest and most terrifying examples were the Rakata. In their time, they were unrivaled, wielding the Force not just as a spiritual current but as the core of their technological empire. The Rakata infused their devices with dark side energy, creating starships, planetary shields, and weapons that responded to their will alone. They pioneered Force-powered hyperdrives, allowing their conquest of thousands of worlds millennia before the Republic ever mapped the stars. Their crowning creation was the Star Forge, a massive construct suspended above a star, designed to siphon its energy and convert it into endless fleets. Fueled by the Force, the Star Forge responded to emotion, intention, and darkness. The more anger and fear a Rakata fed into it, the more efficient it became, but like all things shaped by the dark side, it became unstable, amplifying the Rakata's arrogance and accelerating their fall. In the end, their technology betrayed them, and their connection to the Force mysteriously vanished, leaving only ruins and warnings in its wake. Millennia later, the Jedi would walk a different path, cautiously exploring the intersection of technology and the Force without surrendering to it. They constructed holocrons, intricate data cubes that contained not just knowledge, but echoes of the Jedi who recorded them. Holocron was more than a library. It was a living memory, bound by the Force and activated only by a Force sensitive who could align with its resonance. Sith holocrons, by contrast, were often booby-trapped, guarded by hostile spirits, and designed to test or corrupt those who dared to access them. Perhaps the most striking example of this fusion lies in the Jedi's relationship with kyber crystals. Kyber crystals are not mere power sources. They are semi-sentient conduits of the Force. Found on worlds like Ilum, Jeddah, and Lothal, these crystals sing in the Force, calling to Jedi younglings during the gathering, a rite of passage wherein each Jedi must find the crystal that resonates with them. A Jedi does not choose a kyber crystal, the crystal chooses them. When bound to a lightsaber hilt through deep meditation, the kyber crystal channels the user's connection to the Force, producing a blade that reflects their alignment. Jedi blades are typically blue or green, while corrupted kyber, bled through pain and rage, produce the infamous red of the Sith. Some rare Jedi, like Mace Windu, produced unique hues, such as violet, reflecting complex emotional and philosophical balances. Kyber crystals are also central to the construction of Force technology beyond lightsabers. The Death Star's superlaser, capable of destroying entire planets, was powered by multiple harvested kyber crystals. The Empire's decision to weaponize these sacred objects outraged many Jedi and Guardians of the Wills, turning places like Jeddah into battlegrounds over the soul of the Force itself. Not all Force tech, however, is sinister. On H2, ancient Jedi texts describe devices known as Force compasses, tools designed to locate planets or people through subtle Force currents. These were not digital maps, but intuitive objects, encoded with symbols and responding to intention rather than coordinates. Luke Skywalker would later use one such compass to find the first Jedi temple. Sith engineers, meanwhile, developed alchemical processes to enhance weapons, armor, and even life forms. Through a dark fusion of science and Force manipulation, they twisted beasts into abominations, created self-healing armor, and forged crimson lightsaber crystals artificially. These rituals were often done in tombs, under the eye of long-dead lords whose presence lingered in the very stone. The results were powerful, but unstable. Like the Sith who created them, they often burned out violently or consumed their users. One of the most controversial intersections of the Force and science came with the discovery of midichlorians. Within the cells of all living beings are microscopic organisms, midichlorians, that serve as symbiotic conduits for the Force. This biological component does not create the Force, but allows organisms to perceive and interact with it. The higher the midichlorian count in an individual's blood, the stronger their natural sensitivity to the Force. When Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn tested young Anakin Skywalker and found an unprecedented midichlorian count, he believed the boy to be the chosen one, a figure prophesied to bring balance to the Force. To Qui-Gon, this was not about destiny, but potential. To others, including members of the Jedi Council, the discovery created unease. Was the Force something that could be measured, catalogued, even engineered? This question lingered, and in darker corners of the galaxy, it was exploited. Darth Plagueis, a Sith Lord obsessed with immortality, delved into the biological manipulation of midichlorians, seeking to extend life and even create it. His apprentice, Darth Sidious, learned from these experiments and refined them. Whispers persist that Anakin Skywalker's birth, without a father, was the result of Sith interference, a manipulation of the Force's natural currents. If true, it represents the ultimate fusion of science, power, and will. In the final years of the Empire, experiments continued in secret. On Exegol, cloning facilities were established, attempting to recreate or sustain Force sensitives artificially. Bodies, consciousness, memory, everything became a tool in the pursuit of eternal control over the Force. But the more they tried to own the Force, the more it slipped from their grasp. Time and again, the galaxy has seen this pattern. Technology fueled by the Force can build wonders or horrors. It can preserve knowledge or wipe out worlds. But always, the balance tips when the Force is treated as resource rather than mystery. The Jedi feared losing control. The Sith feared losing power. Scientists feared the unknown, but the Force, in its quiet way, endures. It is not wires nor blood counts. It is not crystals or code. It is life, and it cannot be caged. Chapter 9. Grey Paths and Force Wanderers. Not every Force sensitive fits into the robes of the Jedi or the shadows of the Sith. Some walk the line between, not because they are lost, but because they choose to listen to the Force in their own way. These are the wanderers, the grey pathwalkers, those who honor the Force without submitting to doctrine. They are not a unified order. They have no code carved in stone, but in their solitude they often find truths that institutions forget. The term Grey Jedi has long been controversial. The Jedi Council rejected it outright, insisting that deviation from their code was dangerous. The Sith mocked it as weakness, a refusal to commit. But those labeled grey were rarely either. They were often former Jedi, exiles, or unaffiliated sensitives who saw both light and dark not as enemies, but as aspects of a larger whole. One of the earliest known Grey Jedi was Jolee Bindo, a former Jedi Knight who left the Order after witnessing its failures during the war against Exar Kun. He lived deep within the forests of Kashyyyk, tending to the natural rhythms of the planet and helping those in need, without allegiance, without commands. He believed the Jedi had become too rigid, too blind to their own hypocrisy. Yet he rejected the dark side equally, seeing it as a path of destruction. Jolee often spoke of the Force with wry humility. To him, it wasn't a war, it was a weather system. You learn to move with it, not conquer it. He trained no apprentices, he built no legacy, but his insight influenced those who came after. Ahsoka Tano is another iconic wanderer. Once a Jedi Padawan under Anakin Skywalker, Ahsoka left the Order after being wrongly accused of treason. Though later exonerated, she never returned. Her trust had been broken, not in the Force, but in the institution that claimed to speak for it. And yet, she did not fall. Wielding her iconic white lightsabers, unaligned to Jedi or Sith, Ahsoka traveled the galaxy in the shadows, helping where she could, refusing to allow dogma to define her. She once said, "I am no Jedi," not in rebellion, but in clarity. She followed her conscience. In doing so, she became a symbol of balance, not neutral, but centered. Her path was proof that the Force could be followed without robes, ranks, or temples. The galaxy is full of such individuals. On the world of Lirasan, the Lasat warriors practiced combat in harmony with Ashla, their name for the Force. They believed the current of the universe could guide one's movements, predict enemy attacks, and bring serenity in battle. To the Lasat, fighting was not about violence, it was about harmony. Their martial art, bow-rifle combat, was a meditation in motion. The Imperial Knights, a Force tradition within the Fel Empire, took a different approach. Unlike Jedi or Sith, they pledged themselves not to the Force, but to the Emperor, a ruler who, in their eyes, embodied balance and unity. Imperial Knights were trained in both light and dark techniques, using whatever was necessary to protect peace, but they were not zealots. If the Emperor fell to the dark side, they were sworn to kill him. duty above devotion, balance above loyalty. Even among the Jedi themselves, there were always those who questioned. Quinlan Vos, a shadowy knight with psychometric abilities, often operated at the edge of morality. Sent on undercover missions, he infiltrated criminal syndicates, formed dangerous attachments, and even flirted with the dark side. Yet time and again he returned, not clean, but wiser. Some called him reckless, others called him brave, but all agreed he saw parts of the Force the Council would rather ignore. The grey path is not easy. It offers no medals, no clear rules, no sanctuary. It requires constant self-awareness, humility, and a willingness to walk alone. But it is also a path of freedom. Freedom to learn from all aspects of the Force without becoming enslaved to any. These wanderers often end up as healers, scouts, guides, or defenders of forgotten places. They protect those the Jedi overlooked. They confront threats the Sith ignore. They see the cracks between light and dark, and they choose not to fall into either, but to stand between them, steady and still. And yet, the galaxy is not kind to those who refuse labels. Grey Jedi are hunted by the Sith, distrusted by the Jedi, and misunderstood by the public, but still they walk, because the Force does not demand conformity. It calls each soul in a voice tailored to their heart. One might see the Force in a song, another in a duel. One may hear it in a storm's roar, another in a child's laugh. The wanderers understand this. They know the Force is not a ladder to climb, but a river to enter. Sometimes they fight, sometimes they heal, sometimes they simply listen. And in their solitude, they preserve a sacred truth, that the Force does not belong to the light or to the dark or to the orders that claim it. It belongs to the galaxy, and to those who walk its path with open eyes. Chapter 10. The Force Beyond the War. Throughout history, the Force has been framed in conflict: Jedi against Sith, light against dark, control against chaos. Battles were fought, temples rose and fell, and the galaxy came to see the Force as a weapon of war, something wielded by the powerful and feared by the rest. But beyond the clash of sabers and empires lies a deeper truth. Quiet, enduring, and unshaken by war, the Force is more. It is not just an energy field, nor a path to power, nor a doctrine to be followed. It is the breath between stars, the silence before dawn, the moment a seed splits in soil. And there have always been those who sought to know the Force, not through combat or conquest, but through understanding. After the fall of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant and the rise of the Empire, the few survivors who remained found themselves cut off, not just from their comrades, but from the structure that had once defined their relationship with the Force. In that isolation, many were forced to rediscover it, to strip away the robes and rules and sit, simply, in its presence. Among them was Yoda, once Grand Master of the Jedi Order, now exiled to the swampy world of Dagobah. Alone, surrounded by life and death in their purest forms, Yoda came to understand what he had never fully seen while seated in the Jedi Council chamber: that the Force was not about victory or defeat. It was about presence, connection, and letting go. In secret, Yoda trained with an ancient being known only as the Shaman of the Wills, a spiritual guide believed to be among the galaxy's first true students of the Force. The shaman taught not how to wield the Force, but how to merge with it, to release ego and identity so fully that the spirit could retain consciousness after death. Yoda would later pass this knowledge to Obi-Wan Kenobi and, in time, to Luke Skywalker. Through this, the Jedi learned to transcend death, not through immortality, but through unity. Luke Skywalker, in turn, would go further. Disillusioned by the failures of the Jedi Order, haunted by loss and legacy, Luke searched the stars for forgotten truths. On Ahch-To, he found the ruins of the first Jedi Temple, where the Jedi once meditated in balance between Ashla and Bogan. Here Luke confronted the painful truth that the Jedi, though noble, had also been flawed. Their fear of the dark had made them rigid, their loyalty to institutions had made them blind. Luke came to see the Force not as a light to be hoarded or a darkness to be destroyed, but as a circle. The Force was life and decay, joy and sorrow, creation and entropy. No part could be denied. To deny the dark was to deny the whole. But to embrace it without care was to be consumed. From this insight came a new vision, not of a Jedi reborn, but of a Force reborn. Luke's final stand on Crate, projecting himself across the galaxy with peace and compassion rather than violence, was the embodiment of this ideal. He became not a warrior but a symbol, a myth to inspire those who had lost hope. And then there was the Bendu. Neither Jedi nor Sith, neither light nor dark, the Bendu was a massive, ancient creature who existed in the vast wilderness of Atalon. It spoke in riddles, moved with storms, and refused to take sides. It called itself the One in the Middle, the embodiment of balance itself. To those who encountered it, such as Jedi Knight Kanan Jarrus, the Bendu was both terrifying and enlightening. It did not offer power, it offered perspective. The Bendu reminded all who heard it that to draw lines between good and evil, light and dark, was often a matter of perception. The galaxy is full of grey, of chaos, of choices without easy answers. The Force, in its fullness, makes space for all of this. Even among non-Force users, the presence of the Force shapes lives. Farmers feel it in the growth of their crops. Pilots feel it in the moments before hyperspace. Children feel it in their dreams. It connects all things, not just the gifted few, but everyone. This is why, when the Jedi fell and the Sith rose, the Force did not vanish. It moved. It flowed into different hearts, into the Guardians of the Wills on Jeddah, into the Song of the Lasat, into the silent monks of Eris, into scavengers, stormtroopers, and orphans, into you. Because the Force has no borders. It is not the property of legends. It is not found only in kyber crystals or ancient temples. It is in breath, in motion, in choice. It is in the rebel who stands against tyranny. It is in the healer who holds a stranger's hand. It is in the child who gazes at the stars and wonders. In the end, the Force is not something to master, it is something to know, something to trust, something to become. So when the stars grow quiet and the galaxy turns once more, remember this. The Force does not choose sides. It does not demand victory. It waits. And when you are ready, not when you are strong or perfect or chosen, but when you are still, it will speak. And you will know that you have always been part of something greater.